I can
Okay,
hit
Mr.
Senator
Commissioner, thank you very much for the service and for the service of all the Treasury Department employees. Thank you for what y'all are doing. Um, One thing that I proposed is that Louisiana, just our geography, we tend to get more hurricanes than almost anybody else, maybe more than anybody else. And almost every time there's a major disaster in whatever state it occurs, there is going to be some tax provision that allows disaster tax relief. Um, my question is, I've proposed making this permanent. Would it help the IRS if, as opposed to waiting until it's passed, to then implement, if you knew that once there was a federally declared disaster of some magnitude, that you would immediately begin to click into the implementation of this? I'm maybe begging the answer, but I still think it's important for the record.
Yeah, I think you're begging the answer a little bit, and everybody should know that we monitor legislation. We plan for that legislation, and when there's multiple bills pending and they start to merge, our planning merges, and that's why I think it's obviously clear, but why we're able to launch our activities as quickly as we are. So, we would be supportive. We have to follow the law. We can't launch until there's actually a law that supports our ability to do so.
So if the law was in place, then granted that the efficiency of your staff would somehow overcomes it. But if the law was in place, obviously you could launch before because the law would already be in place. And I don't think I'm begging that answer. I think I'm just pointing out the obvious.
Correct.
Going to a different issue, in May of 2020, Senator Brown and I introduced legislation to ensure that lower income families impacted by the coronavirus outbreak can use their wages reported in the 2019 tax return to determine their eligibility for the EITC and the CTC on their 2020. This was included in the December 2020 relief bill. Can you just give me an update on what IRS has done to make sure that folks will know they're eligible for this relief?
Yeah, again, our outreach, I think, has been more significant than any outreach by the IRS, possibly any federal agency in history. Unfortunately, as a federal agency, sometimes when we think we're doing great, if we put something, for example, on irs.gov or we issue notices, there sometimes tends to be a belief that folks might actually look there. But in this context, during 2020, as I indicated earlier, we partnered with over 11,000 different organizations. We partnered with every other federal agency. We partnered with HUD, and aggressively so in terms of getting the word out, getting forms out, getting instructions out. We had people on the ground throughout the country. We have 511 different offices, and our folks started coming back in June. I did shut it down in March, but our folks started coming back in June, and the vast majority of people who had a reason to be in the office, who could not otherwise telework, were in our facilities.
Got it. Let me ask you one more thing. We talked about it yesterday on the phone, the stimulus checks for prisoners. Last year, when Congress passed the CARES Act, IRS determined prisoners were not eligible. As we spoke, the Ninth Circuit ruled otherwise. I proposed an amendment in this latest COVID relief package to permit those who have been convicted of a crime and sentenced and currently incarcerated from receiving stimulus checks. Surprisingly, that turned out to be partisan, with every Democrat opposing not giving a check to a rapist or a murderer or a terrorist. It was just the most amazing thing. But I recently saw press reports indicating that prisoners in some states had received debit cards which were unusable and had to be replaced. Knowing that the IRS is somewhat stretched thin, there are some folks in my state still waiting on their stimulus checks. So I guess, what is the priority here? Replacing the debit cards for the inmates, or getting folks getting folks who are not incarcerated their stimulus checks? Just kind of amazing. We're giving them to prisoners anyway. And are there administrative challenges to providing stimulus checks for prisoners that take up IRS resources that could be used for other purposes?
The first was the Secretary Mnuchin is the one who made the policy decision on not paying prisoners last year, and then we reversed that when the Ninth Circuit, when the district court ruled against us. With respect to the debit cards, I think as most people, we actually do the files. We deliver the files to Bureau of Fiscal Services. Bureau of Fiscal Services determines, for unbanked people, they determine whether it's a check or a debit card. Those debit cards should not have been issued by BFS to prisoners. There is a note on the individual's forms that indicate that. And those debit cards came back and would be replaced by checks. And as far as the decision or the policy on prisoners receiving or not receiving, we are only a tax administrator. But the individuals could file a 2020 return. There's a separate issue for prisoners having access to a 2020 return, having access to the online ability. We are distributing over 200,000 simplified Form 1040 packages to over 200 different prison institutions in the country to facilitate their ability to file 2020 returns.